Good afternoon. Thank you very much by allowing me to be with you. My name is Nestor Garcia Iturbe. I have a PhD in history and I'm working as professor in the International Institute of Foreign Affairs here in Cuba. I have been for 14 years representing Cuba at the UN, and my subject is precisely Cuban-US relations.
Professor, can you talk a little bit about the nature of your work here in Havana as a professor, and where do you work at?
Yeah, well, in the institute, I am the teacher, I'm the professor that teach all the subjects related with the United States. So we have to teach about the US government, we have to teach about the US foreign relations with the whole world, and also about all the things related with the US in the international organization. That's my main job here. I also used to write books. I have 14 books published, and also to give conference to people that comes to Cuba and wish to discuss about the Cuban-US relation. That's my main job here in Cuba.
Professor, as a specialist in the U.S.-Cuban relations, what is the current status of that relationship between Cuba and U.S. from your perspective?
Well, I think that we had the first step is to reestablish relations. That has been done. And I think that's a good step because that allows us to discuss and to have direct communication between the US government and the Cuban government. There are a lot of things that has to be solved. I think that small things has been solved, but the main things are not solved. We divide the whole process in two steps. First of all, the reestablishment of relations. That step is finished. Now we have to go to the normalization of relations. Normalization is not easy because to normalize relations between Cuba and the United States, there are a lot of things that have to be solved. Though one of those are the blockade, that you call it embargo, and we call it blockade. As far as we have a blockade, we don't have normal relations. Also, President Obama, in December, he signs a presidential order including Cuba in the law that forbidden to have trade with the enemy. Cuba is the only country in the world that is in that law. That means that we are the only enemy that the United States has, at least the official enemy, because Obama included us in that law. Also, there are other things that has to be solved. There is a constant hostility from the US government toward Cuba, a hostility that are directed to eliminate the Cuban government. That hostility is in the way that the US government gives money to those organizations that works against the Cuban government. They also have, the US government has a radio and TV Marti that broadcasts every day against Cuba and to the Cuban territory. There are also the US aid are working in recruiting people to come to Cuba as journalists to work with what they say, the human rights organization. And there are other things related with the Cuban-US relations that has to be solved. And if we are going to be friendly people, if we are going to have a friendly relation between the two countries, it's not understandable that one of the countries is doing such things against our country. I think that's the stage, more or less, in which we are in this moment.
You know, Professor, recently I was reading the Grammar newspaper, and in the newspaper it stated and talked about the impact that the embargo or the blockade is having on Cuba. particularly in the area when it comes to being able to trade internationally. Will you speak about some concrete examples of some of the most recent impact that Cuba have witnessed in terms of the difficulties of being able to trade with other countries because of the blockade that's presently in effect?
Well, mainly the blockade, the effect of the blockade is with the United States, because all the other countries are making some kind of business with Cuba. You know, China is making business with Cuba, and they want to make more. Russia is making business with Cuba, and they want to make more. The Mexican came to Cuba asking for business, and they're going to make business with us. Also, other countries, Spain, Great Britain, Italy. I mean, the only people that also from the United States, they are coming. Everybody wishes to make business with Cuba. The thing is that all the other countries could make business tomorrow, and they are starting to make business. The Japanese are asking for hotels. The Chinese are asking for hotels. Also, the Russians are asking for hotels, and some other people, the Italians, want to have hotels in Cuba. We don't have so many hotels, but I think that when the U.S. tourist agency will arrive to Cuba asking for hotels, we're not going to have any. All of them will be in the hands of the Italians, the Spanish, okay? So, if you want to make business with Cuba, you have to go and to come to Cuba as soon as possible. And the blockade, the only country that does not allow to come to Cuba and make real business is the U.S. It's the only country that is affected by the blockade. Cuba, because it has the effect of the blockade against Cuba. And the U.S., because the U.S. businessmen cannot make business because of the law, because of the blockade. But all the other countries are making business with Cuba. Brazil is making business with Cuba. Japan is making business with Cuba. Everybody are making business. But the U.S. businessmen are not in that phase.
Professor, can you talk just a little bit about the history of the U.S.-Cuban relations in terms of why such a hostility from America? What has Cuba done to cause it to be in the light of being very hostile when it comes to the U.S. policy?
Well, it's a long history. I don't intend to tell you everything because it's going to be a 3-hour program at least. So I'm going to refer only to the more recently aspect of that history, okay? And I think that when the revolution triumphed and we seized the power in Cuba, you know, it was a defeat for the United States. Why it was a defeat for the United States? Because Batista, which was a dictator that was here in Cuba, was supported by the United States. He received money, arms, instruction, and every kind of support from the United States. So when the revolution arrived, when Fidel arrived to Havana, Batista was defeated. And that's the first defeat of the United States. Then they tried to throw down the Cuban government. They tried to throw down Fidel and the revolution, but they were also defeated. Also, they sent an invasion by Bay of Pigs. So that invasion was defeated by the Cuban army, the revolutionary army, the militia, and the Cuban people that fight against the invasion. So that's another defeat of the United States in Cuba. Then comes the missile crisis. The missile crisis, it was solved between the United States and Russia. That was the Soviet Union, that was the one that has the missiles in Cuba. But also they have to take some measures that means a defeat for the United States. Then they continue making hard the blockade. They continue making some hostile acts against Cuba. They bomb planes that came from Miami. They bomb our sugar mills. They throw bombs in our sugar mills. Planes that came from Miami, they burn our sugar cane fields. Some people that make some terrorist act inside Cuba, guided and supported by the United States, they burn schools, they burn his hospitals, they burn buses, you know. They try to establish a guerrilla war in the mountains. But the Cuban people went to the mountains and defeat the guerrilla war in the mountains. So they made some other terrorist act, you know. They blew up a plane with more than 76 people in the plane, all of them dead. And where are those terrorists? They are living quietly, nicely in Miami, you know. So as you could understand, there has been a lot of hostility. Also, every president that came to the United States, you know, every U.S. president tried to do something. So the blockade that started in a way, it finished harder and harder and harder. Also, the Helms-Burton law, which was something that is the maximum exposure of the blockade. So there has been a hostility against Cuba. They organized some opposition here in Cuba. They pay the people to be in the opposition in Cuba. They throw here some spies and things like that. They throw some blacks. You know, they finish with all the ports that we had in Cuba. They introduce some kind of virus in Cuba that affects people. And also, they will not allow us to buy some kind of medicine in the United States. Then, on December 17, you know that Obama make a speech, and also Raúl Castro make a speech that things are going to be improved and that we're going to establish relations. So as soon as the United States says that we are going to establish relations, other countries that wishes to come, you know, in advance than the United States, they start coming. And they start offering things. And they start buying things. And they start selling things. So now, the effect of the blockade is different. We still have the blockade from the United States, but we have more possibilities with other countries. Also, President Obama says that he wants to leave the blockade. He wants to finish with the blockade. And he takes some measures related with the Cubans that are living in the United States, the amount of money they could send, the amount of time that they could come to Cuba, and so on. But all those measures does not modify the most important aspect of the blockade against Cuba. The most important aspect of the blockade are still there. You know, if some bank, if some office are making some kind of financial business with Cuba, they could fine that bank. But the one that decided how much is the fine is the executive, not the Congress. So it's not the same to fine a bank with $1,000 million fine than to fine a bank with $200 million. And who decides if it is $1,000 million or $200 million? The people that are working with Obama is the one that decides. Obama says that the policy that has been developed toward Cuba has been unsuccessful, and then they have to change the policy. I think that what they are doing is to change the method, not the policy. The policy is to finish with the Cuban Revolution, to destroy the Cuban Revolution. But they understand now that the method that they have been using for 50 years are not good ones. You know, they are very hostile. So now they come with other kind of methods. You know? They're trying to give us some kind of different image that we will open our hands. And when we open our hands, we have to be very careful how we open our hands and why. Because that could come something that will destroy the revolution. We are not against that. We think that we should have relations with the United States. We think that we should be friends. Okay? They are going to be a capitalist country, we're going to be a socialist country. It's a different kind of system in one place or the other. But that we could be friends. We could understand that the US businessman wishes to earn money. Okay, that's good. And we wish to earn money too. So we could make a nice relation that you bring your tourists and you will pay me an amount of money and you will keep another amount of money. You want to sell rice? Okay, beautiful. We will buy the rice. Okay, you will have your money for the rice and we will have our money, less money to pay for the rice. You know, so we are not against business. We think that business is good. I think that when an amount of business, a good amount of business, you know, is developed between the two countries, our friendship is going to be better and it's going to be higher because there are some economic interests from both sides acting in that, you know. So that's why I tell you that we are not against relations, we're not against business, we're not against the visit of the U.S. people to Cuba. We love to be friendly with the people that comes to Cuba. And, well, U.S. people are more or less, they feel more or less like Cuban. They like rum, they like to dance, they like baseball, you know. So we have a lot of points that are the same point. And that's what we are thinking. But we are going to continue with our revolution, with our goals that benefits the people of Cuba. We are not going to change that. That's the way you have to accept us, and also that's the way we have to accept you. I mean, with a capitalist country, unless the people of the United States wishes to change that.
You know, Professor, can you talk a little bit about the nature of the system that we call socialism? I understand in 1961, Cuba declared its nature, its system as a socialist system. That was the past. What is it about socialism that caused a capitalist country to be worried? Particularly in terms of how does socialism view the concepts of human rights, equality, education, housing, all these kind of factors that human beings need to develop. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course, I could talk about that. First of all, what do you think when you hear the word communist? You say, oh, communist. You are thinking of someone else who is the worst in the world, you know? But communist is not that. There has not been any communist country in the world because no country has arrived to communism. We say that we are a socialist revolution, but we don't have socialism in Cuba already. Cuba is not yet a socialist country. You know why? Because when Fidel came down the hills, no, he made what we call the agrarian reform. And what is the agrarian reform? The agrarian reform is to give the land to the people that are living in the land. And then we create a private property